Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Today we're going to talk about Ramadan. I want to talk about Ramadan from the point of view of a few stories and give you a kind of broader humanistic understanding of Ramadan as a story and not necessarily what we usually hear about fasting and the rules of fasting and things like that. So let's start off with an idea that is very common all around the world, and these are in a lot of fairy stories and fairy tales from around the world that basically say when somebody gets drawn into the fairy world and the fairy realm or something like that, the way the fairies keep you there is they make you eat something. Because there's this rule in storytelling and in mythology and folklore and in fairy stories and things like that that says if you eat something of a particular place, that eating of whatever it was, it binds you to that place. And I want to use this as a kind of portal, a doorway to understand Ramadan from a less common point of view and less familiar point of view. So keep that in mind. If the fairy story, if you eat something from the fairy world, it binds you there, it traps you there. There is a Greek myth of Persephone. Persephone was out in the fields, with her mother, and she was by herself for a little bit while her mother was just, over in the distance. And the one of the Greek gods, Hades, the god of the underworld, basically wanted Persephone for himself. And where Persephone was, a hole opened up, and out springs Hades in his chariot, and he grabs her and takes her down into the underworld, and steals her, kidnaps her, against her will, and it's a terrible, frightening thing. And her mother is completely broken hearted and just beside herself in grief that Hades has stolen her daughter. And so she goes to Zeus, the king of the Greek gods, and says, Hades has taken my daughter. I want you to get her back. I want her back. And Zeus sends a message to Hades and says, I'm commanding you to give Persephone back to her mother. And meanwhile, down in the underworld, Persephone has been placed on the throne next to Hades. She's wearing, a crown. She's wearing like amazing clothes, and she's got jewelry and all of this, and just all these servants serving her. And he's trying to entice her to stay with him by saying, oh, if you stay down here, you'll be the queen. And she's not interested. He took her by force. She's not interested. She didn't agree to this. And as she is leaving, so she hears that Zeus has commanded that she can leave. So as she's leaving, Hades offers her a little fruit and says, before you go, have a bite. The journey is long. Have a bite of something from my table. Have some fruit. And so she takes the fruit, she eats it, and it seals her place in the underworld because she ate that fruit and it bound her there. And so even though Zeus commanded that she be released and her mother is pleading for her release, the fruit binds her to the underworld. Now she's allowed to visit her mother, but she can't permanently go back, to her home. And so this idea of fairy stories that when you eat a piece of fruit from a particular world, you are bound there. Um, Something similar happens in the Japanese animated movie Spirited Away. And if you haven't seen Spirited Away, I want you to watch it. If you have young ones, 7 and up, they will love it. Um, and even if you don't have young ones, you will enjoy it. Spirited Away. It's a Japanese animated movie. And in that movie, what happens is that there's a little girl named Chihiro, and she is traveling with her parents, and they are, driving through the countryside, and they get lost, and they find this kind of stone gate, and they go through it, and they find this little town, and the town has no one in it, but there is food everywhere, like just freshly made food. So there's like soup that's steaming, and just all kinds of vegetables and fruits and meats and just every bread and everything you can think of. And the parents are so hungry, they eat, and they get turned into pigs. And Chihiro, the little girl, doesn't eat anything. She doesn't touch anything, and so she's very scared. And a young man walks by, and he says, "Did your parents eat the food here?" And she says, "Yeah." And he said, "Oh, they won't be turned back into people again for a long time, and you need to come with me. We're going to figure this out." And so the whole movie is this adventure about how she gets her parents, how she rescues her parents, because they accidentally wandered into the fairy world, the spirit world. They ate some fruit there and some food there, and they became bound to that world. And so I want to take this idea and go back to the story of Adam and Eve in the garden. So Allah says, after he creates Adam and Eve and Adam and Hawa, and he says, you can stay in this garden for as long as you like, and you will have everything. You'll have everything here. But just one thing. You see that tree over there? Don't go to that tree. Don't eat anything from that tree. And there might even be somebody who will try to convince you to eat from that tree. Don't do it. So what happens? Well, of course, we know the story. They're enjoying being in the garden, but there is that tree, and it draws them, and it's like, the one thing that you're not allowed to touch, right? Don't touch that cookie jar. Don't eat that. Don't eat that next slice of cake or whatever it is, right? Like we've got this like an impulse. We're impulsive, and they go to that tree, and there's somebody there. His name's Iblis, and he convinces them that this is a good thing, and they should take a bite. Why not? And they take a bite, and Allah finds out, and he says, since you've taken a bite of this tree, I want you to go down to the earth and stay there for a time, until I give you a way to come back. That's a very interesting story, right? You can have everything from the garden, everything from this garden, except that one thing. And the way I read this story is that one tree that was in the garden did not belong in the garden. It was actually from earth. It belonged to earth. And when Allah said, don't eat from that tree, what he was saying to them is, if you want to stay in the garden, don't eat something from the earth. Otherwise, you will have to go to the earth because it will bind you. And so they eat from that tree, and all of a sudden they find themselves on earth. And so there's this idea that there is something in us that, and this is mythological. right? This is symbolic. This is metaphorical. This is not, anything physical or literal, or just something you'll find on a X-ray scan or something like this. So there's something in us that is from that tree that Adam and Hawa and Adam and Eve ate from, that we inherited as children of Adam and children of Eve, and so it's in us, and it binds us to the earth, right? It binds us to the earth plane. And Ramadan means a kind of scorching, a kind of burning, a kind of let's just push the definition a little bit, a kind of cooking, right? The heat. It has to do with heat. And what happens in fasting from food is that little piece of whatever it was that Adam and Eve ate, when we fast, we start burning it out. We start burning it off. We start burning it away. And so what we're trying to do in Ramadan by fasting is to burn away the fruit of the forbidden tree. We are trying to say to Allah, we are going to temporarily stop eating so much food from the earth, because what happens when you eat a lot of food, right? Let's think about this. What happens when you eat a lot of food? The very first thing that happens is that you feel full, so you can't take anything more in. You feel heavy, you feel drowsy, sleepy, and if you keep eating food, you get heavier and heavier and closer to the earth. It kind of binds you to the earth. Whereas, if you eat lightly or eat less, you find that you're a little more awake, you're a little more energetic, you're a little more nimble, you're able to kind of, hop around and have some energy and dynamism and things like that. Whereas if you eat lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of food, you're just I ate too much. I can't move. You eat less, you can move. You're a little more, active. So this idea that when you eat the food of the earth, it ties you to the earth and you become heavier like the earth. When you eat less or you fast, you are becoming lighter, so that you are separating from the earth and kind of floating, right? And you are able to move around a little more. And so symbolically, metaphorically, what that means is, when we fast, what we are acknowledging is that it's not the food of the earth that's keeping us alive. There's another source of nourishment that we have that keeps us alive. So there is a moment in the early life of Jesus when he goes out into the desert for 40 days and he fasts and he's very hungry. And the devil says to him, why don't you turn those stones into bread? You can eat, feel better. You're in the desert. It's hard, hot sun. It's too much. Just use your powers. Use your, you're a prophet. Use your powers. Turn those stones into bread and, have a little bite. And Jesus says to the devil, man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God. So what the fasting discipline does is it teaches us that we are not physical creatures who are always needing bread and food. We are spiritual beings who feed and nourish ourselves and get stronger by every word out of the mouth of God. This is God saying, kun fayakun, be, and it is. This is God saying, all the words in the Quran. This is God constantly sending blessings on us. This is God and the prophet and the angels constantly blessing us, and that is the nourishment that we receive when we can turn our attention away from food and toward that direct line of nourishment. And so that is the kind of process that's happening during Ramadan when those who are able to fast are experiencing that heat, that burning, that scorching of Ramadan. What it's doing is it's cooking that fruit that Adam and Eve ate right out of them. It's cooking that fruit right out of them. And this is a kind of a turning toward God, and more toward God, less toward food. And even if for those of us who have some health issues and they can't fast so easily, Ramadan is about the turning toward God. It's less about the fasting from food and more about turning toward God, making sure that turn toward God is happening. Because you can spend a lot of time fasting from food, but if your mind is not turning toward God, it's kind of like the real underlying goal of Ramadan is not getting fulfilled and actualized. So this is a kind of way of understanding Ramadan as a burning, as a scorching heat that burns that forbidden fruit right out of us. It is an alchemical process. It is a transformational process, and there's so much. You can tell this is a very rich topic, and there's many layers to it, and we can go into it a lot more. But just wanted to give you an overview of this idea that in the month of Ramadan, we are really like Jesus, saying, I don't need to turn the stones into bread. I'm receiving my nourishment directly from the voice of God, from the call of God, from the words of God. And that is what sustains me, nourishes me. That's what created me. So why would it not also sustain me? So this is a kind of a mythological way and a symbolic way of understanding the real spiritual significance of Ramadan.